Hi there, Linda Goodall here. Customizing designs with fonts is one of the most common things embroiderers do with software. Often you're going to be adding lettering to other designs to personalize it, but you can also make an entire design just out of lettering. This simple design was created with fonts and motifs, so you don't really need to do any digitizing. In this video, I'll walk you through the process of recreating it. You'll need to have the digitizing level if you want to do the motif stamp thing, and if you have a lower level, well, we'll just be using text. I really love fonts. I'm a die-hard font junkie, and my computer is just loaded with fonts. I love designing with fonts and just playing around with them in general. Fortunately, Hatch comes with a generous selection already built in, and although it can auto-digitize TrueType fonts installed in your system, I rarely ever do that because the fonts are so nice that they're already built in, and you have access to a whole lot of other ones. So let me show you my font cheat sheet. I've had to shrink my screen down so you can see everything, but all of these fonts in the light blue are ones that come built into Hatch. The ones in the red and the dark blue are ones that I've purchased from other sources. So the red ones are Wilcom fonts and the dark blue ones are John Deere fonts. I can look at this and kind of get a flavor for a font that I'd like to use. For the sample that we're working on today, I chose Mammoth. And I liked that M that's real swirly there. So let's start by creating a new document. Control N. And you'll notice that I use a lot of keyboard shortcuts, and I'll tell you what they are. When you work in any software, you're going to become more efficient if you use keyboard shortcuts. You don't have to learn every one, just the ones you use the most often. So I'm going to start by typing Mrs. And I'm going to go to the Lettering and Monogramming toolbox, click on Lettering, and I'm just going to type in Mrs. And I'm not going to put the period there because we're going to use a heart. Now, why did I start with that and not do the whole Mr. and Mrs. thing? Well, I need to have these separate so that I can manipulate them and play with them. So I'm going to select that, and oh yes, I chose Mrs. because it has one more letter than Mr., and then I can get more of a feel for how the letters will look together. So I said that was Mammoth, right? So I'm going to just press the M. It takes me to the M's. Mammoth is the first one in the list. Notice it says Mammoth 25. I like how John names his fonts with a size because this indicates that we need to make this a pretty big font. And Hatch defaults to 10 millimeters. So I'll type in 25 there. And the reason it's 25 is see how thin these strokes are? If we made this, a 12 millimeter font or a 10 millimeter font, these would just be way too thin. Yeah, I think I like that. Now, another thing I want to do is I want to scrunch these letters up a little bit more so there's no space between some of these. Down here on letter spacing, I'm just going to hit the arrow keys. So sometimes I'll type in a number when I know what I want, and sometimes I'll just use the arrow keys. I think I went too far. That looks pretty good. So 0.7. Well, let's take down one more notch. There we go. So now that's going to overlap so we won't have any jumps between those two letters. So once I have all this made up, all I have to do is clone it, and to do that I hold down the right mouse button, click and drag, and I'll just take the S off. Now I have my Mr. When I was doing the original design, I played around with this a bit, played around with arrangements, and did I want it on one line, did I want it on two lines, and then I played around with sizes, and we cannot make one letter bigger. So if we go back to our original, see how this letter is much bigger? And it has to be separate. So one way we can split this apart so that I have the M separate from the R is to do break apart. So on the Lettering and Monogramming tab, if I have my word selected and click break apart, over here on the resequence bar you can see that now I have two letters. So with my M selected, I'm just going to stretch it. That might work. That's pretty good. Now, let me point something out here. because you just may have seen it briefly. When I click on it once, I have black squares around here, and that indicates I can resize. If I click it again, I have white squares, and that means I can rotate it. If you wonder why it's rotating instead of resizing, see if your little squares there, your little handles, are hollow or filled in. If I like that size, now how am I going to get it down here? I don't want to do break apart on this one because I don't want each letter separate. So I'll just come over here to Mrs. and eliminate that. And let me move that just a teeny bit closer. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag a selection around both of these, and I'm going to clone. So right click and drag, and I want to move it so that that R is right over that other R. That way I can make sure my M is in the same relationship to Mrs. as it is to Mr. And now I'll just delete my R, that extra R. So there we have that. Now let's see what we got going here. I'm going to select this, and I'm going to group. So Control G after you drag the selection around each of them. And then if we look over here on the resequence bar, we can see that the RS is at the top, but the M for Miss is at the bottom. So I'm going to just select that RS, click this double arrow, and that will move it to the bottom. We want them to sew together. So I'm going to select that by dragging a selection around those and do Control G again. So now I have the primary bits, and I can kind of play around and see where I want these to be. Now, one thing in this font, there is no ampersand. So there's an ampersand, and if I go to the Mammoth font, you can see that I typed an ampersand there, but I have a box. If you get a box like that, it means that the character isn't in the font. I happen to know that I really like the ampersand in typewriter because it's really fancy and pretty. So let me enlarge that a bit. And it's cool, but see how this stroke is really pretty even all the way around, and we have definite thick and thin strips on our other letters. So the style doesn't really match. So after messing around a bit, I decided that I liked the one in Harrington. And if we enlarge that one a little bit, let's set that one at 20. See, it's got definite thick and thin, and the character just looks more in tune with the rest of our design. So I'm going to change that to a lighter blue. And there we have our letters done. Now if we go back to our other design, we can see that we have some little hearts here. How do we get those in there? I think I need a little bit more spacing here. To get the little hearts in for the periods, I went to the Digitize toolbox. I clicked Motif Stamp. And then from the Single Motifs category, I scrolled down until I found the heart. And there's the heart. So I'm going to click OK and just click and click. And there's my heart. I'm going to press Escape to release it, otherwise I'll just keep stamping little hearts all over the place. I'm going to move that into position, and I'm going to change the color to red. All we have to do is just click on the red tab. It looks a little big there, so I want to shrink it down 10%. And I can do that by going up here to the percentage resize and typing in 90. You want to make sure that your lock is locked. That way we know it's going to shrink 90% in both directions. And press enter. And it shrunk it down just a little bit. So I'm going to move that into position. And then, you know what, I think I want this one to run first. So I'm going to put that one down there. Then I'm going to do the clone thing again. Remember, right click and drag. And I'm going to take the ampersand and move it to the bottom. So now my design is going to sew Mr., then Mrs., then this heart, and then this one. our design's done. Now, it took us just minutes to do that. I can tell you that the first one took me a little bit longer because I played around with a lot of different fonts and moved them around and resized them and did all kinds of whatnot with them. But the thing is that if you just open up your software and you play around for a bit, well, number one, it's a lot of fun, but number two, you can come up with some interesting designs. Just put yourself in play mode. Just pretend like you're a little kid on Christmas morning and you have that new toy that's got all those parts that you can play around with, and just play around. Now, one more thing that I like to do before I save out my design for my machine, actually I should have saved it way long before now, because you always want to save the ENB file. So let's save that now. I'll do Control S, or you could just press this button or choose it off a menu, and we're going to give it a name. I'll call it Mr. and Mrs. 2. Click Save. You always want to save the ENB file, and the reason is this is your master file. Let's suppose that you want to come back and you want to change this to something else. Well, you can do that with your master file, but if you've saved this as a PES file or VP3 file or any other stitch file for your machine, it's not so simple because they aren't letters anymore. So one final thing I do is I go to the stitch player and I do a little virtual sew out. And you can see it sewing. This just kind of reinforces that we've got everything in the right spot. And when you're just starting out, you'll probably want to do a little slower than that. I'm just doing it really fast for the video. Now, another thing that I often do is I optimize the stitching order to make it closest point. And you'll find that over here on the Edit Objects menu, Apply Closest Join. And I'm not going to do that on this. And the reason is, see how this section goes underneath this section? And they have a definite kind of overlapping thing going on. And if I do that, well, let me just do that to this word here. So I'm going to select, leave out of, I have to get out of the sewing sequence there. So I'm just going to drag a selection around that. If I choose closest join, see how now this piece is overlapping in the wrong direction? Let me do Control Z. See, that's how it was. And if I do redo, see how it's overlapping incorrectly? I recommend not doing that on fonts. So if you're happy with your design, you're ready to export it, and that's on the Output Design toolbox. You'll just pick Export. Pick your format. We'll say PES. I'm going to sew this on my baby lock, I guess. And then I will just save it. And now it's in PES format and it's ready to copy to my stick or otherwise get to my machine and ready to test sew. Now, you just created a new design. You need to test sew this before you put it on your project. Test sewing is not a waste of time. It can save your project. So I recommend that you test sew. So I think you can see how easy it is to be creative with Hatch. You don't even have to know anything about digitizing. You can just select some fonts. If you have the digitizing level, you can add some other elements, such as the stamp tools. There are some little doodads in the monogramming window, which I talked about in another video, but you can be very creative without having to start with any artwork or any digitizing skills. So I hope you'll give this a try. Play around with your fonts. See what you can create. You can create all sorts of interesting designs with fonts. Be sure to allow extra time for experimenting. Hatch does have a lot of little hidden gems that are already digitized that you can use to make your designs more interesting. I hope you've picked up a few tips and that you'll give this a try. Thanks for watching. See you next time.